All right. Well, hello to everyone. I'm Jonathan Landeck. I'm a co-founder of North American Millets Alliance, along with Don Osborne and Joni Kinwell Moore. We're really happy that you're here today, pleased and honored for our seventh NAMA University of Missouri Millets webinar in this International Year of Millets. I see there are a lot of familiar faces here. There might be one or two new people, but all the names look familiar just by recalling the email list we have. But in any case, our seventh webinar today, it's hosted again by North American Millets Alliance in collaboration with University of Missouri, two departments or two parts of University of Missouri, the Food Engineering and Sustainable Technologies Lab, as well as the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. And today we're going to really focus on the nutritional aspects of millets. We have two wonderful and very knowledgeable, highly qualified speakers today. We'll start off with Lanier Dabruzzi, who's the Director of Food Innovation and Institutional Markets for the United Sorghum Checkoff Program. And Lanier will be talking about sorghum, the resource-conserving ingredient. And second, we'll have Kelly LeBlanc, who is Vice President of Nutrition Programming at Old Ways. And I'll do a little more in-depth announcement, biography of both speakers. But Kelly will discuss millets as nutrition powerhouses, including the latest scientific research on the role of whole grains like millets in a healthy diet and misconceptions of grain nutrition and tips on how to incorporate millets into a nutritional diet. So we're going to start it off with Lanier Dabruzzi. Again, she is the Director of Food Innovation and Institutional Markets for the United Sorghum Checkoff Program, where she's responsible for increasing the use of sorghum in the U.S. food supply as an ingredient and standalone product, as well as providing marketing and education to a variety of audiences. Prior to joining Sorghum Checkoff, Lanier served as the Assistant Director of Food and Nutrition Outreach for the Dairy Alliance, a regional affiliate of the National Dairy Council, with a passion for agriculture and nutrition communications. She's worked with a variety of commodity food groups in her career, including dairy, beef, and almonds, regularly appearing on radio, television, and in print media. Lanier is a member of and has served on the boards of the Food and Culinary Professionals Dietetic Practice Group with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the Georgia Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She received her Bachelor of Science from the University of Southern California in Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, her Master's of Science from the University of Tennessee in Nutrition Sciences, and completed her dietetic internship at Emory University Hospitals outside Atlanta. So as you can see, Lanier is highly qualified, so is Kelly. I'll give a more detailed biography of Kelly when it's her turn. But first, let's hear from Lanier. Thank you very much again, both of you, for being here. And go ahead, Lanier, let's hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's always kind of weird hearing your own bio, right?
Yeah.
All the time. There's a lot going on. If I can get a thumbs up or a verbal yes that you can see my screen. Great, thank you, appreciate it. Well, as Jonathan shared, I am with the United Sorghum Checkoff Program. The Checkoff is the Commodity Association for Sorghum in the United States. We represent sorghum farmers throughout the country. And, oops, back, trying to move this. There we go. I'm trying to change my screen. There you go. So I can see my screen. So I get to talk about sorghum and food all day long, which is a delight. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian by trade. And one of the reasons that I love sorghum so much as a dietitian is because of this chart. So what you're looking at is sorghum's percent daily value compared to comparable grains. Daily value just means the amount of a nutrient that you see here on the left-hand side of your screen on that y-axis that you're supposed to get every day to maintain your health. On this chart, green denotes excellent source, meaning you're getting more than 20% of that nutrient, and orange denotes good source, so between 10 and 19%. So just a really quick visual snapshot, you can see just how nutrient rich and how robust that nutrient profile is that sorghum has, especially nutrients that we know Americans are really looking for: protein, fiber, B vitamins. And to put this into a bit more perspective, a half-cup serving of whole grain sorghum has more than double the protein as a serving of quinoa, nearly double the iron as a 3-ounce sirloin steak, and you would have to eat 7 cups of raw spinach for the same amount of vitamin B6. A few takeaways that I want you to take from this slide. One, the caloric implications of this, right? So if you're looking at the right-hand side of your screen, that's a meal. A steak, some quinoa, and spinach. That's a meal, and that's calories. And those are calories that we know Americans are getting too many of, right? Too many calories. We have an overweight and obesity epidemic. So getting that nutrition in just that half-cup serving of sorghum, but also the financial implications, right? So getting and choosing foods that have a nutrition bang for their buck. And Kelly will be talking about this with whole grains in general. Getting that nutrition bang for your buck out of foods is going to be more and more important moving forward, especially as we are trying to feed this growing global population. Taking a deeper dive at sorghum's nutrition and what that means to various disease states, the majority of the research around sorghum and its effect on disease states lies in its antioxidant profile. This is an ORAC chart that you're looking at. ORAC measures the amount of antioxidants in foods. You can see sorghum foods in gold, those gold bars, and other foods in the blue bars. Now, again, as a dietitian, I have told people countless times, many patients and clients, those dark berries, eat them because they're so high in antioxidants, right? And they are, but look at those compared to sorghum. Now, the majority of the antioxidants in sorghum is on that outside, that bran, but you can see as some is in that grain as well. So let's cover a few of these disease states and look how those sorghum antioxidants play. So this is looking at colorectal cancer cells, and I'd invite you to visit our website, sorghumcheckoff.com. We have quite a bit of research around sorghum in various disease states, everything from esophageal to liver cancer, breast cancer, colorectal, like this, a lot of great information. But this study is looking at this proposed mechanism as to why sorghum is so effective in its role in cancer prevention and mediating cancer. So what this is showing is those polyphenols from that sorghum bran helps block the invasion of those cancer cells and blocks the growth of it while targeting killing and cleaning out of those cancer cells in the body. So this is an area that we are taking a deeper look at, really, really exciting area to look at. Diabetes. Diabetes is rampant in the United States, right? And if we can have a foods first approach to prevention or mediation of the disease, that's always a good thing. You'll hear food as medicine is a big, but not buzzword, but buzz term these days, because trying to prevent and use food to mediate disease states. So what I want you to look at on this screen, this top level, the red bar is a rat with diabetes that is untreated. Okay, so you can see they're starting out at a higher glucose level, and after a 2-hour glucose tolerance test, remain high. Down at the bottom is this green line. That is a rat without diabetes. Okay, so what we're looking at and what interests us is everything in between. So that purple, orange, and blue. The blue line is a rat with diabetes that is being treated with diabetes medication. And now the purple and orange lines are rats with diabetes who have had their diets supplemented with sorghum extract. Look at where they all converge in this red circle after a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. What that shows us is whole grain sorghum not only is an excellent source, like we saw in that first slide, of fiber, which helps mediate the release of glucose in the bloodstream, but the extract from those polyphenols help regulate blood sugar. So again, if sorghum can be used as part of the diet and has been shown to bring down that blood glucose to about the same level as a rat without diabetes or rat with diabetes that is being treated with medication, wow, what an amazing opportunity. And I will share that we are looking at first stages of a human clinical trial looking at sorghum and diabetes and heart disease, because this research is just so robust and so promising. And heart disease. Sorghum has ACE inhibitory properties. What that means is it helps relax those blood vessels, which decreases blood pressure, which helps the heart. What you're seeing on your screen is it also helps improve dyslipidemia. That's just a fancy way of saying it decreases that bad cholesterol and increases that good cholesterol. It is because of this and a lot of the other health attributes and nutrition that sorghum provides that we have been working with the American Heart Association. If you visit our website, again, sorghumcheckoff.com, we have five delicious recipes that we have developed with them that are heart healthy, including sorghum. So looking at the functionality of sorghum, right? It's not nutrition unless you're eating it. So when I talk to food companies, how can I essentially sell them sorghum? How can I talk to them about sorghum, about its unique attributes? Well, one of the very, very unique attributes of sorghum is what you're seeing on the screen. So on the left-hand side is a sorghum grain sliced in half. And then the right-hand side is it under a microscope. So these big circles that you're seeing are the carbohydrates. And then the white ribbons all around that are keeping it really, really tightly packed are the proteins. This structure is very unique to sorghum. And it is because of this carbohydrate and protein cross-linkage that when you cook sorghum and refrigerate or freeze it and pull it back out, it maintains that texture and it maintains that moisture. So right before the call, we were chatting about our work in schools. So if I'm talking to a school food service provider, they can make a big vat of sorghum and keep it in the walk-in and pull it out as they need it throughout the week and not have to worry about it drying out or getting gummy or goopy. Similarly, if they're making a big pot of soup or stew and using sorghum in it, it won't absorb that water as quickly, so it won't get gummy and soft. This also applies to the flour. So if you are milling that sorghum down and using it in a baking application, that baked good, a muffin, for example, will stay moister longer because that retrogradation or loss of moisture is not happening as quickly as, say, a wheat. Okay, so I can say sorghum is the best thing since sliced bread all day, but are consumers really going to want to eat it? And the answer is yes. It checks the boxes of a lot of what consumers are looking for right now in that food landscape. We've discussed it's antioxidant rich. It's a source of plant-based protein. So when you look out at that food landscape and all the diets there are, and maybe even folks on this webinar today, we could have a vegetarian, a vegan, somebody avoiding gluten, a meat eater, a climatarian. I just heard at a conference that there is this new phrase called climatarian, and these are folks who eat based on the food's impact on climate and sustainability. And sorghum fits into every single one of those. It is fiber rich. It's an ancient grain. You're hearing that phrasing more and more. Non-GMO, gluten-free, as I mentioned. And the great thing about it, we saw that chart and all the nutrition that it has. Oftentimes with gluten-free carbohydrates, it is just that starch that you're getting because so much has been stripped away and it's really just that source of starch. But with sorghum, you're really getting that robust nutrition profile. It's culturally inclusive. If you were unaware, sorghum was originally cultivated in Africa thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, still used in African cuisine, used in a lot of Asian cuisine, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, and even some Native American cuisines. So when we look at that cultural landscape of the United States right now, having foods that reflect the different cuisines and different cultures is more and more important. And we're seeing that reflected on menus and in food offerings. It is responsibly sourced and sustainable. I am not the expert in that area, but we have been trademarked by the USDA, the resource-conserving ingredient, for a reason. And if you'd like to learn more about that, please visit our website. We are free from the top 9 allergens, and I should have changed that. It's top 10 now because sesame has been added to that list, right? But again, our work in schools, that's so important that we are free from those allergens. And we did some consumer research about 2 years ago with consumers who had never tried sorghum before. And they got to try sorghum, and nearly 80% continued to seek it out and continued to use it in their homes. If you've ever been part of a product launch or an ingredient launch, that retention rate is unheard of, and nearly 80% retention rate. And that just goes to show you, once folks learn about it and try it, they really do enjoy it. And that is part of what the checkoff does, is educate and raise awareness around the crop. So we've talked about sorghum kind of as a flour and as a grain itself, but it is in a lot of foods that you are probably seeing in your grocery aisles. Multigrain Cheerios, the Gerber Little Crunchies, even over here, the gluten-free bun at Chick-fil-A. It's in quite a few products out there. And again, working to increase the number of products and number of offerings that it has here in the United States. Again, please visit our website, sorghumcheckoff.com. We have great information, delicious recipes, tips and tricks with cooking on the site. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, my email is here on the screen, and I am on the NAMA email as well, if you'd like to reach out. And I believe we'll have questions at the end. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Jonathan.
Oh, thank you very much, Lanier. There was one question, we might as well address it now before we move on to Kelly, and that was from Suresh, I think. And the question had to do with where you're talking about the health benefits. Were you talking about what he calls yellow or white sorghum?
I would have to look at those studies, because we were talking about 3 different studies there. But again, if you go to our website, you can read the studies yourself. Generally, we're looking at white sorghum when we talk about the foods that we eat. So most of the foods that we eat are made with that white sorghum. So if he wants to send me a note, I'm happy to look at it.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, let's thank you very much, Lanier. That was really interesting, really well presented, really clear. Obviously, the data don't lie, and I was not aware of how many products contain sorghum. That's amazing. Now we're moving on. We're going to hear from Kelly LeBlanc, who is Vice President of Nutrition Programming at Old Ways, which is a nonprofit dedicated to improving public health by inspiring individuals and organizations to embrace the healthy, sustainable joys of eating the old ways, which are heritage-based diets, rich in taste, nourishment, sustainability, and joy. Kelly has a bachelor's degree in nutrition from the University of Texas, where she also did her dietetic internship, as well as a master's degree in gastronomy from Boston University with a concentration in food policy. In 2018, Kelly joined Old Ways to promote whole grains and healthy cultural culinary habits. As Old Ways Vice President of Nutrition Programming, Kelly is responsible for the design, direction, and oversight of the organization's multiple nutrition-related programs, including but not limited to Mediterranean, African heritage, Latin American heritage, Asian heritage, and the Whole Grains Council. Specifically, Kelly works with other staff members at Old Ways to develop and promote Old Ways' heritage diet cooking and nutrition curricula, conferences, and special events, educational resources as well, and other related nutrition content. Before joining Old Ways, Kelly helped research Frances Moore Lapay's 2015 book, World Hunger, 10 Myths, and also managed an award-winning healthy eating program for Boston College Dining Services. As is the case for Lanier, we're very honored and pleased that you can make time for us today, Kelly. And we are looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. At the Whole Grains Council, we love helping educate people on not just the nutritional benefits of whole grain, but also their culinary benefits, their sustainability benefits, and just so many wonderful reasons to love whole grains. And of course, if you're not familiar, we also manage the whole grain stamp program for food packaging. So before we dive into millets today, I really want to take the opportunity in my presentation to zoom out a little and look at whole grains more generally. So just as a refresher here, a whole grain is a grain that contains all of its original bran, germ, and endosperm, so you're getting that full nutrition there. One of the most well-known nutrition characteristics of whole grains is fiber. Because we know how healthy fiber is for our digestion and cholesterol, a lot of companies add extra fiber to their foods. Whole grains have more fiber than their refined counterparts, but it's not just about the fiber. Whole grains have a host of other beneficial nutrients like vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and more. And there was a report from the American Institute for Cancer Research that found that about 3 servings of whole grains per day reduces the risk of colorectal cancer by 17%, but that the evidence for whole grains is actually stronger than the evidence for fiber alone. So although fiber is a known nutrition powerhouse, whole grains have a number of other bioactive compounds in addition to fiber that are thought to have anti-carcinogenic properties. So basically, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Additionally, not all fibers are created equal. Different fibers are thought to play different roles in our gut microbiome. So it's good for us to have a variety of different fibers in our diet. Fiber from whole grains may also be particularly effective when it comes to type 2 diabetes. A study from the Interact Consortium found that for every additional 10 grams of fiber from whole grains, the risk of type 2 diabetes is 25% lower compared to only a 9% lower risk for with fiber from, or with total fiber. So all this to say that, whole grains bring a lot more to the table. The Global Burden of Disease study published in 2019 found that low intake of whole grains was one of the leading dietary risk factors for disability-adjusted life years among men and women, and the leading dietary risk factor for mortality among women, ahead of high sodium intake, high trans fat intake, and high sugar sweetened beverage intake. So in other words, increasing the consumption of beneficial food groups like whole grains is just as important, if not more so, than decreasing the consumption of detrimental ingredients like sodium or added sugars. In another study published this year in Nature Medicine, researchers developed risk assessment models to estimate how much various dietary habits contribute to type 2 diabetes risk. The largest burden of type 2 diabetes was attributed to low whole grain intake. Research is also beginning to reveal just how much of an economic impact these reduced risks of disease could have when applied to a national population. A study in Nutrients found that if whole grain intake in the United States was increased to meet recommended levels, the estimated direct medical cost savings from reduced risk of cardiovascular disease would be more than $21 billion annually. And we could save an additional $14 billion annually by the reduction of incidence in coronary heart disease. And notably, this study found that even very small increases in whole grain consumption, like a quarter of a serving per day, could still result in very substantial cost savings. Since then, there's been a lot more research in this field of health economics. I've detailed some Australian data below, so it'll be interesting to see this move forward. So as they mentioned at the beginning, I am a registered dietitian, and someone was asking me recently, like, what one of the biggest mistakes or misconceptions that people are making when it comes to nutrition and diet. And one of the first things that came to mind for me is that a lot of people who have an interest in nutrition, but may not have a formal training or education, is the problem of missing the forest for the trees. So a lot of people might get hung up on a small detail and let that allow them to lose sight of their overall diet. And I think phytates and the concept of anti-nutrients definitely fit into this category. So phytates are the term for phytic acid when bound to a mineral. And these are bioactive compounds that are found naturally in nearly all plant foods. They are sometimes referred to as anti-nutrients because they can bind with some minerals and make them less available to your body to absorb. That said, the quantity of nutrients that your body can absorb from food varies widely depending on what other foods you're pairing it with while you're eating, depending on how it's cooked, and depending on what your overall diet is like. Additionally, if you're regularly eating these high phytate foods like whole grains, it actually may limit this anti-nutrient effect. There was an interesting study where scientists assigned non-anemic young women to either a high phytate diet with lots of whole grains and beans and nuts and tofu, or a low phytate diet with refined grains and eggs and cheese, and followed their health for 8 weeks. And at the end, they found that after consuming a high phytate diet for 8 weeks, there was actually a 41% increase in serum iron response, which indicates to us that these women were actually better able to absorb the iron in their food. So really what this suggests is that the habitual consumption of a high phytate diet can reduce the negative effect of phytate on non-heme iron absorption. All of this to say, like, this is not something that people need to be worrying about with their diet. Avoiding phytates would mean not just avoiding foods like whole grains or beans, but subsisting on a diet of mostly synthetic foods or animal foods, which research tells us is not a recipe for good health. Since phytates are found naturally in plants, It's not surprising to learn that they also appear to have antioxidant and anti-cancer properties. Some of you may have seen the headlines, I think more last week and the week before, about saying whole grains may be optional for a healthy diet. These headlines are in response to a new study in which researchers pooled information on the eating habits of more than 100,000 people across 21 countries. And they measured how well their diets aligned to this pure diet, which consisted of fruits, veggies, legumes, fish, and full-fat dairy. And the people who most closely followed that diet were less likely to develop heart disease and had a lower risk of mortality. When one serving of whole grains per day were then added to their analysis, the risk of cardiovascular disease and mortality didn't change, which led them to conclude that whole grains must be optional for a healthy diet. But taking a closer look at the science reveals why that's not necessarily an accurate analysis. So one serving of whole grains per day is far lower than the amount recommended in dietary guidelines around the world, and it's far lower than the optimal amount suggested by the body of nutrition research. So it's really not surprising that amounts as low as one serving per day didn't make a significant difference in these particular markers of health. And additionally, when you look at the foods they included in the whole grain group, they included things like white rice, and they did not include our favorite food group, which is millets. So I think all in all, the study just really wasn't designed to be able to assess the impact of whole grains on health. So now we're going to zoom in and look at millets. So like whole grains, millets are nutrient powerhouses. The exact nutritional makeup varies significantly between species and even within different samples of a single species, as you can see in this chart. For example, some samples of pearl millet have clocked in as at about 9% protein, while others have been recorded as high as 21% protein. As a whole, though, there are definitely some key characteristics and patterns that come through. Like most cereal grains, millets are higher in carbohydrate content than fat or protein. Many millets provide at least 10% of the recommended daily value of copper, magnesium, manganese, phosphorus, and vitamin B6. Some millets are also a good or excellent source of other important nutrients like zinc or folate. Teff was long believed to be high in iron, as shown by some of the numbers that I pulled. But I've also been reading that more recent tests have shown that the iron content might actually be coming from the soil it's mixed with after the grain has been threshed on the ground, and that the grain itself may not be as high in iron as we originally thought. So it'll be interesting to continue to take those measurements and see where we land. And of course, Lanier had a beautiful slide kind of comparing sorghum in particular and its nutritional qualities. Around the world, civilizations have adapted to their given climates with a diverse array of food traditions and cuisines, leaving some people to wonder, like, how can we possibly move towards a more sustainable diet without alienating cultural food preferences? Researchers at the University of Delaware recognized this dilemma, so they created models to identify country-specific dietary shifts to improve sustainability while still being culturally appropriate. And the key ingredient in their approach was millets. So in this study, authors conclude that increasing the share of whole grains to make half of our grains whole can improve nutrition, thereby offering a strategy to overcome the nutrient depleting effects of elevated CO2. Further, they found that increasing the prevalence of C4 cereals, which are grains like sorghum and millet, that undergo a type of photosynthesis that produces a 4-carbon compound, which apparently reduces water vapor losses. So choosing more of these C4 cereals over C3 cereals, which are grains like wheat and rice, can help be more environmentally friendly because they're more water efficient. To control for cultural acceptability, the amount of C4 cereals proposed in the study was based on the maximum historical share of these grains in each country's diet, which came out to be like a 10% increase over current levels. And then to control for the cultural acceptability of whole grains, the authors simply proposed a modest shift of making half the grains whole. And so in conclusion, they suggest that the combination of increasing whole grains and increasing C4 cereals like millets in particular would result in strong co-benefits between increased nutrient supply and reduced environmental impacts. And best of all, these proposed shifts are based on realistic changes that would not disrupt the prevailing food cultures. Millets have a rich history in the cuisines of India, but refined wheat and rice have become more dominant in more recent years. So this is a really nice study. I don't have time to read all the quotes here, but definitely taking a look at incorporating millets as part of a strategy to increase nutrient density in a way that is culturally appropriate for that patient population. So if you're interested, I'll share these slides with the webinar organizers so that you can have access to all the research I'm referencing. In this study, researchers introduced millet-based lunches at 2 schools in India and compared the health outcomes of those 136 students to 102 students at schools who ate their regular fortified rice-based lunches. Those in the millet group significantly improved stunting, which is an important measure of growth and development, and improved their BMI, while the rice group did not. Additionally, all of the millet meals they made for the school lunches had high acceptability, with the most popular ones being a finger millet ildi, which is like a steamed cooked fermented savory cake, little and pearl millet BC bell bath, and upma. So basically there's a lot of different culinary possibilities with these ingredients too. When our doctors and dietitians tell us to eat more vegetables, we know that we can't just eat carrots and then like, oh, job's done. We intuitively understand that, we need to be eating a variety of different vegetables. And the same thing is true with whole grains. Most Americans need at least 2 or more servings of whole grains per day over what they're currently eating. But it looks like we're relying on the same handful of grains over and over again. Millets are an important and underutilized member of the whole grain food group. And this chart has not been presented publicly yet. We just got this survey data back this month. But according to our census representative survey of American adults, looks like 40% of adults have heard of millet, which is an increase over when we did this survey in 2021. And here you can kind of see its familiarity as compared with other whole grains. And then zooming in on millets. And when I say millet in the singular, we're generally referring to proso millet here. But you can see we have seen a slight increase in both people having heard of the grain as well as people having tried the grain between 2021 and 2023. And so again, with just about 2 or more servings of whole grains per day over what we're currently eating, we can drastically cut our risk of diet-related disease. There's so many different things you can do with millets. Lanier's group's website has a lot of great sorghum recipes. On the Whole Grains Council, we have lots of recipes for different types of millets. And yeah, so I think, I will leave it here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly. It's very inspiring. It makes me want to go out and buy some millet, sorghum and millet products. There was a question here or a comment before we get into the questions. There was a little comment here from Babak, and your comment was, well, it was for Lanier's presentation, but your comment, Babak, was we also have biofortified sorghum varieties rich in zinc and iron. When you say we, what are you referring to there? If Babak's here. If not, we can come back to Babak. Okay, we're open to questions. Anybody can turn off your mutes and ask a question of either Kelly or Lanier whenever you'd like, or raise your hand or jump right in.
This is Gary Whitgriff. Both of you, I would like to ask if you mix millet with, well, I'll put it this way. A lot of people find that when they eat millet, like proso, just cooked like rice, that it's too solid. It's not as palatable, where almost all the recipes that I use are mixed with grilled onions and garlic and hamburger or something like that. I make stews and soups and different things using a low portion. So my question is, does that decrease the dietary benefits when mixed and cooked with other foods?
Thank you. I'm happy to chime in, and I would say absolutely not. In fact, there's a lot of research on the synergistic effect of different food combinations together. I think a good example is like when we cook tomatoes in olive oil, we're actually able to better absorb the lycopene in tomatoes. And I mean, people eat food, in combination with each other. I think we're still able to absorb the nutrients in foods when they're combined, and in some cases there may even be benefits to that. So millets like sorghum and other millets have so much culinary versatility. So I would encourage you to experiment. And with proso millet in particular, I know Chef Robin Aspel has talked about kind of different techniques for getting a different outcome. So by altering the amount of water she uses, she's able to make it sometimes stickier, sometimes fluffier, sometimes creamier. And I would suspect that, similar experiments could be made with other millets as well. So yeah, please do get creative in the kitchen.
I would just add to that, anything that will help you eat that food that you know is so nutritious, or your family or whoever, working with clients, is always good. Always good to experiment with that kind of stuff. And honestly, we are one of the reasons that being in the world of nutrition is so fascinating is we are learning new things all the time about the nutrition. So like Kelly said, that that matrix, the food matrix of those nutrients within foods. We're learning more things all the time of it.
This is a follow-up, and it's a topic that you only have on a personal basis, and that is when people have told me they ate millet just as a side dish, like potatoes or something, or rice as a side dish, that it increased constipation. Is that even with the supposed fibers, is there an issue why it should be cooked, perhaps with other foods, vegetables, things like that?
I think for those individuals, we would probably want to look at their overall diet and what else they're eating. Are there other meals where we could make some adjustments? I would hesitate to attribute it to maybe that one change. I think, we would have to know more information for that.
I'm wondering if it's maybe the particular way it's cooked or the particular type of millet. Because of course there are many people who eat millet as a staple in much of the world, and they're not complaining about those kind of symptoms in general. It would be interesting to know more about what's going on there.
This a couple of people, of course, I don't know their full diet, but two of the people I'm familiar with eat fairly high vegetables, a lot of vegetables, and not quite as much fruit, but a lot of vegetables. And maybe by adding that cup of millet to the on their plate, that changed what they normally were digesting. And the other thing, like when we were in Uganda and had millet, it was finger millet over there, and that is eaten at every meal. It just, in northern Uganda, they always eat it, and in a full mix of lots of leafy greens and things like that. So I just wondering if proso is a little bit different.
Hi, everyone.
Yes, please.
Hi, Uche Jumbo. I actually do have a breakfast cereal that I made. I developed about 2 years ago with fonio. And I saw in the matrix that fonio is kind of like on the low end of what people have really heard. So I could tell you it's really, people don't even know it exists in the millet family. So we're struggling with that. And so the breakfast cereal is an instant breakfast cereal similar to oats, where you put it in the microwave for 2 minutes and you eat it. So in my 3 years of being the founder of this company, it is very difficult to market one. I'm sure, like, to people about the fonio and millet. But interesting thing that I discovered this year was initially when I came out, oatmeal is a little softer and people are familiar with the taste of oatmeal. And then the texture of millet is a little bit crunchy and gritty if you tried it before, right? And so I fear that people will not be receptive to that because they are used to oatmeal. And so if I was trying to develop an instant product, it can't cook more than 2 minutes because it can be instant, right? So how do I make it soft for people to eat? But later this year at Expo West, because I had a sample booth at Expo West, I realized a lot of consumers actually preferred the gritty texture. So it was kind of eye-opening for me in March at Expo West that a lot of people actually did lean into what I was, maybe for lack of a better term, afraid of. They said, oh, I would rather eat it gritty. I don't prefer soggy oatmeal. I prefer that texture. I like this texture. So what I was trying to say is we're all learning. Even as the founder, I'm still learning people's palate, even though I went in trying to aim for it to be a little softer. And to someone was talking a little bit about this, it's pre-steamed. So the vendor, my supplier gets it, and we pre-steam it here in Minnesota to kind of like give it like a little boil it a little bit so it's a little softer, and then we use it and it's dried. And so at some point I thought, do I need to increase the temperature to like steam it a little bit more so that it could be a little bit softer to give the oatmeal texture? And this year I realized I don't need to. It is just who it is. It's just gritty, it's nutritious. This is the texture. it would be for not for everyone and just for those that like it. So I was trying to share that just to give context in how I've evolved from the soft space to this, to embodying my texture as it is now.
You might compare it to something like steel cut oats. It's
Yes.
the same thing, but it's just cooked and served in a different way. And actually, back in the millets, and for that matter, sorghum area, I personally liked a cracked pearl millet porridge that I got introduced to it in Mali, and I kind of wondered about a cracked millet or cracked sorghum, for that matter, marketed like you're doing with fonio as a breakfast cereal. So there's a lot of options and opportunities to bring those benefits to people. But thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Speaking of consumer feedback, we work with students a lot, and introducing a brand new food to a lot of these students and teachers working in schools. We have found that sorghum is familiar enough to grains they eat, like a couscous or a rice or something like that. They're willing to try it. But there is this brand new and it's exciting. So usually that might be kind of what's happening too. Like, oh, I'm willing to give it a try because it's like, the oatmeal. But I do really feel that so many of the chefs we work with and even consumers are really drawn to this. We say kind of new age, new ingredient, but we know these have been around forever and ever and ever. It's really an interesting dichotomy, but people are really willing to give it a try.
Yeah, it surprised me that number about that 40% of Americans are familiar, at least with the term millet.
Mm-hmm.
That really surprised me. And given that, I'm wondering, in the area of research, is there much interest within the USDA for funding nutritional research in and around the millets?
There is for sorghum.
For sorghum, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to pursue for other millet grains?
Well, there are opportunities to pursue that. One has to build a case. Part of what one has to build the case on is unique information, because there's actually a lot of literature on the nutritional value of these millets. And so when you start digging into all that literature and the fact that it hasn't been built on over time, and it's not necessarily a paper in the last 5 years, there's still a lot of work on it. And so they have a pretty good understanding of the base value of these millets in the diet, what amino acids they bring to the table, what fatty acids they bring to the table, what the fiber content that they have is. And of course, the big one that we have an advantage of is that most of them have at least a gluten-free. Not all millets are all gluten-free, but most of the millets have gluten-free lines or that can be selected for.
Correct. And that's a selling point that we actually do use for our breakfast cereal, correct? Gluten-free.
And the only thing I would is make sure
Go
that
ahead,
you
David.
really got gluten-free.
Yes. Gluten-free certified anyway. So we go through the whole certification with NSF.
Is it possible to put a number or quantify? I'm assuming there's some kind of a drop off in nutritional value if, for example, what I might call unprofessionally, I have no idea if this is a term, maybe a second level of processing, like maybe into a packaged bread or any of those products that you showed there on the screen, Lanier, versus just, just a simply processed grain and then cooked, like you might cook rice or something. Is it possible to quantify the loss of nutritional value going from one level of processing to another?
Let me make sure I understand your question correctly. So you're saying in that those Cheerios, for example, would the nutrition be the same there versus a whole
Just
grain?
Yeah, versus a whole grain.
Well, it would be less because it is it's on the ingredient list, right? So it would have to be a larger amount to get that nutrition from just that grain if you were to cook that on your stove and eat that. But as far as processing, yeah, so when you take off that bran and pearl it, you are losing a lot of those antioxidants and a lot of that fiber. So that certainly does affect the nutrition.
But I think too, that's another case to be mindful of when you're consuming whole grains. People ask similar questions like, if I take my fruit and make a smoothie, like put it all in a blender, like how much fiber do you lose? And it's like, it's not going anywhere. Like, as long as you keep it in the jar, like juicing is a different story. Like if you've ever cleaned out a juicer, you can see all the fibrous pulp that's left, but the processing in and of itself, like taking a big particle and grinding it down into a smaller particle, you're not necessarily losing large quantities of nutrition. But as Lanier said, if you are sifting out that bran or germ, then yes, you're going to lose some very important stuff. And we have examples that look at I feel like oats, there's a lot of research, right? Like if you look at a rolled oat versus instant oatmeal versus a granola. And again, we're not seeing large changes in the nutritional content, but I think the particle size does impact how quickly our bodies absorb it. And so like what our blood sugar response would be. So that would change more so, but if you're making a cool sorghum product where you use whole grain sorghum flour, mix it into some type of tortilla like product, like sure, you're still going to get some great sorghum benefits in that. So depends on how you're processing it.
Okay.
One caveat.
I think. Go ahead.
So these little crunchies, these are those Gerber little crunchies, right? And so they're extruded, so they look like a little Cheeto. The number one ingredient is whole grain sorghum meal. The only thing that is affected when you extrude is, remember we saw that slide with the carbohydrates and the protein, all that stuff, it kind of busts all that up. So extrusion increases the protein availability for digestion in the body. That is the only caveat that I would give to that answer and what Kelly shared.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and Yadi Wang had your hand up. Would you like to ask a question, Yadi?
Yeah, thank you. Well, at first I probably want to address Jonathan. Like I'm a farmer and we mill whole grain wheat, heirloom wheat, and then we only use stone meal because what we've learned is the heat is actually impacting the grain, the bran and germ and the sperm, and causing that dispersion and really destroy that nutritional value. That's why stone meal is always better than industry meal, like when you have stainless steel meal, things like that. I think that has impact. And well, I really want to appreciate Lanier and Kelly, you guys really, putting millet and sorghum, these ancient grains out as a Chinese. I'm always looking for my ancestry 8,000 years ago when we start eating foxtail millet. And until today, we're still eating that. When we're ill, we always have a porridge of millet in our diet because, the lactin amount and the gluten amount is so low. And that also the metabolism of those plants is phenomenal. Consider they're C4 plants rather than C3 plants. So my first question is actually, have you guys actually, so obviously from dietary perspective, you look at a human metabolism as individualized approach for each person, how they choose their diet and how they get the nutritional. And when I look at the field, I look at my plants, I'm looking at the plant metabolism. And so for ancient grain normally have lower pairs of chromosomes versus modern grains have higher pair of chromosomes, which really, for ancient grain that provide them more genetic expression that on their metabolism and adaptation to the environment. Is there anything that you guys in your work or related research have seen that people have drawn connection on metabolism of the plants versus the metabolism of human, and how that actually linked to the health component through this cellular level of that kind of work.
So I will start this with the fact that I am not a plant geneticist at all. And there are some very smart people who can answer that part of it better. But when looking at the antioxidants, there is research linking that in sorghum, the antioxidants increase in sorghum with that stress and the heat. So just like in our bodies, when we are stressed or we're going through whatever, our bodies then respond by producing chemicals, right, to protect ourselves. The same thing happens in sorghum, and because it is such a drought tolerant crop, it is often planted in those regions where it is stressed and it is not getting a lot of water. But it is because of that it increases that antioxidant, and that is the plant's way of protecting itself. And then we, on the end use, benefit from that antioxidant.
Interesting.
Anything to add to that?
Yadi, maybe you had a second question. Maybe you'd like to ask that, and then we really probably should say goodbye.
Thank you. And Lanier, I think that's a perfect example. And, for plants, there's primary metabolism and secondary metabolism, and antioxidant, vitamin, and micronutrient, all those fall into secondary metabolism. Whereas the energy utility of the plants, when they have leftover energy, that's where they dive into. And people always ask me, what is the zinc, magnesium, and vitamin amount in our heirloom wheat? I said, depends on your practice, because if your plant is fed with synthetic, fed with not sequestering the sunlight for maximizing energy, you're not going to have those secondary effects. And my question is, how millets and sorghum in this world, like from their specific behavior and from this metabolism standpoint, kind of that type of research, have you guys looking into how that would tremendously benefit human health in perspective compared to other C3 plants that we're talking about?
There is an initiative called the Periodic Table of Food Initiative that has just begun, that we are speaking with them because we're doing some research with USDA to update various forms of sorghum to be added to Food Data Central. And a lot of that data will be shared with them, but I would encourage you to look at that group. They're doing a lot of what you are talking about exactly, and how that kind of plant genetics and plant health affects human health, and kind of that intersection of those worlds.
Thank you. And if you may, I just have one last appreciation on polyphenol part you talk about. One of my mentor used regenerative practice growing broccoli and altering the sunlight scatter, which shift the wavelength of the amount of radiation on the plants. They were able to alter the polyphenol to 1 out of 17 specific type that also helping for cancer, right? So when you talk about polyphenol in sorghum, and of course there are 5 or 7 different type of polyphenols that are naturally occur in sorghum, and are there any specific type that is really would potentially could help cancer, and are there any ways that we could do, to cultivate that and to, kind of working on human health side of the story?
Yep, and that's exactly kind of what I was saying, that we're always learning things about food and the crop itself. We're learning stuff about different lines and genetics of various species of sorghum. So certainly something we are looking into.
Okay.
Well, thank you to everyone. If everyone's, and I'm sure we are thinking as much about their crops as Yadi's thinking about them on that micro and macro level, we're all doing pretty well. But thank you for being here today and participating. We'll have another seminar a month from now, and we'll get that word out to you for that. Thank you especially for Lanier and Kelly for sharing your knowledge with us. Very informative and very encouraging in many ways too. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of July, and we'll see you in midsummer. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.